Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we are continuing our discussion about difficulties. Right. Last week we talked about difficult conversations, and this week we're going to broach the subject of difficult people. And I want to start with asking a couple of questions. Um, think about this: is there someone on your team who drains your energy or the energy of other people? Right? Someone who resists accountability or just makes interactions with them harder than they need to be. And as I was thinking about this, it was, we talked about difficult conversations last week, and I was, well, it's not always a difficult conversation. It's not always the topic that's the challenge, right? And we gave some strategies last week of how to deal with those topics and mindset shifts that you can use to move through that. But it's not always the topic. Sometimes it's the person or the people on the other side. And how do you handle that without losing your patience and losing your cool, losing your credibility, or dare I say, losing your mind, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about this week. And we're going to break down a couple of different strategies or tactics. Robert has some, I have some. And our hope is that you walk away with something that will help lead you through the chaos, that it will help you to manage difficult people on your team and to figure out, quite frankly, whether or not they actually are difficult or if something else is behind it, because it's not always that they're difficult. Um, and you need to be able to figure that out and figure it out without the drama. So, Robert, opening thoughts.
Uh, I like this topic because it's pretty universal. I don't know anybody that said they, in my immediate circle or otherwise that have said they have never had a difficult, they've never met a difficult person. It's really funny because I was meeting with some coaches yesterday and we were talking about controlling people, which is kind of like a subset of this. And one of my colleagues said, well, if you don't know any controlling people in your family, you're the controlling person. So difficult people are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and sometimes they're us.
Oh, I misunderstood what you said. So, controlling people, not to control people. So,
Right, controlling people.
okay, okay,
Yeah. Mhm.
okay. I get you.
Yeah.
Um, and it made me think. I wasn't part of that conversation, but as I was thinking about this topic, I was wondering if and I'll just use me as an example. So, if I'm projecting that someone is difficult, is that a reflection that I'm the difficult one,
Mm.
right? And so there's a part of this, as in just about everything that we do relating to other people, and in particular in our leadership journey, is some self-awareness and the emotional intelligence that it takes to be a leader, and that self-awareness component. Is it the other person? Is it me? Is it that they are difficult, or is it something else? And the something else sometimes is that they just have a different personality, and maybe it's the personality clash, right? Or it is that they need something that they're not getting. And so we'll talk about that. And my first strategy or tactic revolves around that, which is getting to the heart of what the issue is, taking the time to assess before you react or respond. And as a part of that, to detach. And as someone who is studying mindfulness, right? Detachment is a huge part of mindfulness and non-judgment. And so taking the time to ask some questions about whether or not the person actually is difficult, um, and to not ascribe motive one, or put a label on someone and take a step back and look at the behavior. So I trained this week. I had um, a class in legally terminating,
Mm.
right? Making legal terminations. And the first step of being able to terminate people legally, at least in my mind, is one, take a step back and pay attention to how you're hiring,
Mhm.
right? And how we're hiring, how we're training, coaching, mentoring people on our team. So the best prevention for terminating people is to hire the right people, people that fit your culture, fit the job, have the tool set, the mindset, and the skill set to do what it is you're asking them to do. And so if you can reduce the performance problems on the front end, you set yourself up for legal termination on the back end, because the things we do to get our people to be high performers, right, are the things that ultimately, if those people don't get there, are the things that you needed to have done to set yourself up when it's time to terminate them.
Mhm.
And so it's all one and the same, and it requires us to take often a step back and ask the questions that we're always asking here. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And are are you working with the right people in order to accomplish what it is you're trying to accomplish? And so the self-awareness component of this is, what are your triggers? Right? What are the things that trigger you? What is it about this person's behavior? Because we want to focus on behaviors, not personality, unless the personality is creating the performance problems, right? We have to allow people to be who they are, and we have to meet them where they are if we're going to help them move along. And when you were saying, can't, about controlling people, and I was thinking you said control people,
Mhm.
my first thought was, well, we can't change them,
Mhm.
right? So all we can do in the end is try to influence them to be better, to not be difficult, to not be the person that's draining not just yourself as a leader, but other members of the team as well. And how do we go about doing that? And we'll get into that. But asking the question, what is it about them that triggers you or others? What is it about them that sets you off? And asking, is it the behavior, or is it something about them? Right? Maybe they're just a little quirky, right? Maybe they are simply have a different work style or a different communication style, and that's okay. Then it means you just have to learn to work with that.
I'm taking some notes here because even before that, you said a couple of things that really made a lot of sense to me. One is, if you can, you take a step back and look at the context. But sometimes you're just thrust in a situation with somebody that you just don't get along with, or they are difficult. So sometimes you won't be able to do that. If you can, that's fantastic. Sometimes you can't. However, when you said something, I forget exactly the words that you used, but it was around remaining calm, right? Not losing your cool. And I think that even before that, everybody needs to have some kind of mechanism, technique, strategy for allowing themselves to stay calm. Because sometimes when you're around those triggering people, they just especially, let's just throw it out there. Family, they don't just push the buttons, but they install them too. So they know how to get you. They know how to puppeteer you sometimes. So
Yeah.
especially if you're in a situation, and we don't just talk about the business world. A lot of times we do. Most of the time we do. But this is something that can help you in your personal life as well. You need to understand that, how you react, and what not only what your triggers are, but when your triggers get activated, you need to have some kind of technique, mechanism, whatever you want to call it, in place to calm yourself down enough so you can think through the situation. And I think that's what happens a lot of times when we are just learning about self-awareness. We don't have that, meta awareness. We don't have enough information to know how we're behaving in that moment. We just think we're being normal, but we are actually reacting to something that someone else is doing, and that could be causing problems. So I think that really what you said is great, and to go with that is have something to, you said you're studying mindfulness. Sometimes meditation helps. Sometimes a couple of deep breaths help. There's a reason why take a deep breath and count to 10 has been around for so long, because it gives you that space. So having something there that allows you that space so you can think clearly, because if you're not thinking clearly, you're most likely will make the situation worse.
Uh, That is absolutely true, right? So what I'm hearing is that one, yes, we need to recognize the triggers, right, from other people. And you're right. Sometimes you don't have, depending on who you're interacting with, you don't have the luxury of time, right, to sort of know something, but you do know, you don't know them, but you do know you, and that part, the self-awareness piece, and having a strategy or a tactic, that some sort of fallback. And I'll share a story in just a minute that displays a lot of this. But recognizing the trigger, staying aware, particularly of your own reactions and how you tend to react, and asking yourself whether or not you're actually escalating something, as opposed to diffusing it, even if it's only internally.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that we know about how our brain works is that it's very much fight or flight, fight, flight, freeze. And sometimes when we let the trigger sort of take us down a path, really isn't anything if you take a step back. And what's the 5-5-5 strategy, right? Will this matter in 5 minutes? Will this matter in 5 days? Will it matter in 5 years? Or whatever, seconds, minutes, or months, whatever the fives are. But the point is, it does this really matter?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, right, to don't be reactive and be more responsive. And I think the first key is to pause, is just to take a second, right, to take a couple of deep breaths, whether it's to 10, whether it's to close your eyes. I was famous for, in my own mind, I don't know that anyone else ever noticed, but I was famous for getting up and leaving the room, right? In the middle, even in the middle of meetings, I would just get, like, excuse myself. People, you get up and go. People think you're just going to the restroom, right? You don't have to explain anything. I would just get up and go. And there was this series of meetings that I was facilitating and was lobbying at the time. And we were working on this really big, important bill, and I was facilitating like three different groups of people trying to get different inputs. And one group was a group of lawyers. And if you've ever dealt with one lawyer, you can imagine dealing with a group of like 18. And so, so there was that group, and there was someone in that group in particular that I had sort of a long standing issue with. Um, And the really interesting thing was I didn't know we had an issue until my boss came to me and told me that we had an issue. And it was because this person wanted something that they were not getting.
Mm, mm.
And so they went to their boss and said I was being difficult. And then their boss went to my boss, and then my boss came to me and asked me what was going on. I explained the situation, and it turned out to be fine, at least from my perspective and my organization's perspective. But it that created an issue between us for quite a while because that person didn't just come to me, right? So it was sort of that escalation that created a dynamic between us. And then I'm paying attention to that person over time. And what I noticed was that in all kinds of meetings, not just things that I was facilitating, others, this person was just a difficult person. And I can step back and say that objectively because I observed them in interactions with other people, right? So this isn't about me and they were difficult to me or with me or creating problems for me. I'm just watching them sort of march through life, right? Just knocking over things because this person wanted what they wanted the way they wanted. And a lot of times that's the thing. So what I learned when I was facilitating this bill in particular was that when I gave this person the opportunity to talk, right, that his temperature came down. And before that, I'm just noticing the interactions with different people. Again, it wasn't about me, but my observation of other people. And we're in these meetings, and we were in meetings, Robert, like for hours at a time, right? And this was like one of the most important things I ever did in my career as a lobbyist. And we spent hours and hours together. And the very first meeting or two, it was just sort of contentious and chaos. And I remember getting to a point where I was like, you know what? And they're sort of the lawyers are sort of back and forth with each other. And I'm just sort of observing, one, because I did not have the subject matter knowledge at the time to engage in the back and forth. And I was learning what I needed to learn, but I was also paying attention to who were going to be my allies and who were going to be the people
Right.
that are going to create problems for me in this process. And at some point, the very first time I yelled and I was kind of like, okay, stop. Right. And it was a pattern interrupter, but it came from my frustration.
Mhm.
And if I knew then what I know now, I would have handled it differently. Um, and but what I learned in the process was when it started to be that, I would just excuse myself and go out the room. We were in a conference room and my office happened to be close by. I would just go in my office and close the door and take a few minutes, right? And I was like, it's like, Whitney, just calm down, breathe, right? So this ability to recognize how you respond to things, right? Because we're not going to change other people, but through influence of how we show up. And eventually, right, the whole group, we were able to be very productive and get where we needed to go. But those first couple of meetings, I wasn't equipped. I didn't even imagine what was sort of going to happen. And then as it was unfolding, I realized I wasn't really equipped to handle it. And I developed the tools and the skills, the knowledge, that wisdom in real time. And so giving yourself permission really to take a break, to take a pause, and to not take it personally. And I think that's a really important part of this detaching and assessing is that sometimes we let our own ego get wrapped up in it, and it's not about us. It's about that person. And you have to let them be who they are and then work to sort of um, be the rudder on a ship that right, and the rudder is relatively small in comparison to the size of the ship to turn things around.
Yeah, my philosophy with dealing with difficult people is this. Well, part of it is difficult people don't know they're difficult. They don't see themselves as being difficult, right? So it's they see themselves as maybe being assertive. They may see themselves as being passionate. They may see themselves as really pushing for something or what they believe is right. So that's one thing. So that's one aspect of that. So try to take that view. The other thing that I will say about that is it is hard sometimes not to take it personally. I agree with you that we shouldn't take it personally, especially when we see that that person is maneuvering through life in their way. That's just their way of doing it. But sometimes it's hard not to take it personally because we get triggered. And that's why it's so important, like we're saying, to give yourself that space to be able to find some kind of, if it's, getting up and walking out of the room, getting a drink of water, taking a couple of deep breaths, go, going into your office and doing a quick 30 seconds of chair yoga, whatever you got to do to give yourself some calmness. That's really important. The other thing that I when I work with clients on this, one of the things that when we go through a, usually when they have a particular situation, because it's a lot easier to coach around a particular situation, like,
Right.
hey, well, what went on, and what would you do differently, and so on and so forth. After we have that, I talk to them about their mindset. And one of the things that I sometimes say is, now, especially when it's somebody that's climbing the ladder, the corporate ladder, or they have goals in their career, I'll say, well, do you think, or how often do you think you'll run across somebody like this in your career? Oh, lots. And I was like, okay, so what's another way to look at this? It's practice. It's practice for when you encounter these people, um, over the course of your career, whatever horizon that is. I'll tell you something else. When I used to, my last job, I designed the orientation program, new hire orientation program, and it had a lot of different programs in it. And one of them was communication, how to, communication and using active listening and all these different things. And one of them was dealing with difficult people, or it was dealing with difficult customers, but it was really dealing with difficult people, because we have internal customers in organizations. So the
True.
difficult customer it could be a colleague that you're working with. And I would start off by going, how many of you had a coworker or a colleague in another, or in your last organization, that was very, very difficult to work with? And usually at least 75% of the hands went up in the air. And I said, okay, here's the thing. That person is in this organization wearing a different face. You're not going to get away from dealing with difficult people. They're just everywhere. And because they don't think they're difficult, it's just how they are maneuvering through life. And we all need to be better equipped with encountering and how we deal with those folks when we encounter them.
Absolutely. And to the point, we're not going to change them. And so we have to be better at interacting with them,
Yeah.
because unless you are in some sort of position where you can remove them, legally remove them, then
I like how you
you're
said
going to have
legally,
problems.
legally remove them.
I'll just leave it at that. I won't get into all the different ways that it could be something different. I think the other piece of this, and I was talking about non-judgment, is being curious, right? And asking some questions. And again, instead of assuming ill intent, or because, like you said, that they don't know that they're difficult. So there is no point in assuming ill intent. There are some people who that for whom that is true, right? For some people, they have ill intent and all of that. But for the vast majority, it is they just don't know. No one said anything. There's probably some sense of entitlement that goes along with that behavior. They've been allowed to get away with it, so they continue to do it. It has served them in some capacity, in some respect, and so they'll continue to do that. So, ask some questions of that person, and again of yourself. So that was that first piece, right? In the end, you want to take a moment to control your response, control yourself, because that's all you have control over in the end. And so the way to take back control of a situation that is seemingly getting out of hand because someone's being difficult, and your natural inclination is to, you know, maybe bump heads, is to take back control of the situation by controlling your response. And this goes to, I haven't mentioned this in quite a while, but from Jack Canfield's The Success Principles, the very first principle of success is taking 100% responsibility, right, for your life. And what that means ultimately is owning your responses to things, right? We can't control the event. We can control our responses. And when we control our responses, it can help move us to the outcomes that we are seeking. And I'm going to assume that the outcome that you want to seek is some sort of harmonious relationship or interaction with this person if you have to be involved with them for any ongoing time. And if we're talking about your team members, right, until they're not a part of your team, they are going to be there. And so, how are you going to make some shifts? It starts with you. And then we move to setting boundaries, right, and clear expectations. And this is one of those, I think this sort of leads to our conversation last week about difficult conversations, right? Because often we don't want to have the conversation with people about boundaries or what our expectations are. And as I was training this week and a few weeks ago, with the new managers that I was training, this, I don't want to say unwillingness, but the missing piece of having conversations about expectations. Someone said something to me yesterday that I think it goes a long way towards explaining this concept. And it's not about fear. It's about a thought that I shouldn't have to have the conversation, right? That people should know. Common sense says, and first of all, you can't go through life based on what should happen or should have happened, because what you think should happen may be different from what other people think should happen. And what you think is common sense, maybe someone else doesn't think is common sense or has never given a moment of thought to. So we cannot navigate life with they should know better. They should know how they're showing up, because in reality, most people don't have the level of awareness that they think they do. So going back to your point, Robert, difficult people don't know they're difficult. They don't have self-awareness around that. And so we have to be willing to step away from what should be, what should happen, and deal with what is. And that means setting boundaries and clear expectations, right? And defining what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior, whether it's with your team members or it's with any number of other people. And ultimately, the person that I was just talking about, we had a conversation about what was transpiring. And I actually had pulled him out of one of these meetings and said that the behavior was unacceptable. And I just said those words. I'm like, this isn't unacceptable. I mean, this is unacceptable. And if it's going to continue, then you're not going to be a part of us finding this solution, because I can't have you guys constantly at each other, right? We have to be respectful. We have to listen to each other. If we're within our own community, if we can't come to a consensus on how to move forward, how are we going to work with the stakeholders who have a whole different perspective than we do? Right. And so simply had to have that conversation. And one of the things that I did that you mentioned was sort of the concept of preview, right? Practicing ahead of time. And I really stopped to think about what I wanted, because I was dreading going into work on the days that these meetings were on my calendar. And I was like, I have to turn this around. I have to do something to turn this around. And so had to have a conversation, had to lay out some ground rules. And part of that was me sort of not doing that the very first meeting, laying out the boundaries and expectations, because I'm assuming these are all adults, lawyers. We should be able to do this. And the fact of the matter is, you got to put guardrails around. And so the boundaries and expectations, it's a conversation that has to be had.
I want to give a word of caution. Difficult people usually don't like boundaries, right? And that's how you know you're dealing with a difficult person. The moment you throw up a boundary, there's usually some kind of pushback or issue. I'm not saying you shouldn't negotiate those boundaries, but a really difficult person will have.
No, I agree. You should be prepared for that resistance, but that's part of your role as a leader.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And we've talked about, where you've got episodes on resistance, right? So
Absolutely.
you can go back and get some tools for that. But you're absolutely right. You know, think through what could happen, right? What is the response that you're going to get, so that you can practice and think through and be prepared for what's going to happen. That doesn't mean don't have the conversation, but you can't be afraid that someone's going to behave the way that you know that they behave. So
yeah, and there have been situations personally for me where I've said, you know, I got to put some boundaries on these interactions, because sometimes it could be somebody coming into the conversation. And I was talking about control earlier, and I in my conversation yesterday I gave an example of interactions with somebody who, every time I was having a conversation with them or interact with them, they were trying to control every single thing that I did. And so I had to put some boundaries on that relationship. And it was like, look, you know, we need to, if we're going to interact, I need to have some autonomy there. And you need to be able to allow that without what I'm doing bothering you. And when I tell you, it was like I called this person the devil. I was like, okay, I see what's going on here. This person is just difficult, and they're used to controlling everything, or trying to, because you can't control things, you can't control people, but they were used to going into situations and relationships and trying to control every single thing in their orbit. And when they couldn't, it would cause them all this discomfort. And so I just had to, my final boundary with that, in that particular relationship with that person, was just to not have any contact with them. And when I did have to have contact with them, it was very, you know, here are the facts. I'm laying these out, and then I'm going to go and do what I have, you know, scheduled over here. It wasn't, you know, there was some pleasantries there, but it was basically, okay, hey, how are you doing? And here's what I need to talk to you about. Here's the information you need. And I have another meeting I got to go to right now. So if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll beep out. So I had to put those boundaries on that relationship, because other than that, it was, you know, can you do this? Okay, you can do that. Do it this way, even though there are 5,000 other ways to do it. And the way you were doing it was just fine. and getting really good results. I just want it done this way. And so I had to limit my interactions with that person.
And sometimes that's the answer, right? You
Yeah.
have to remove yourself from the situation, and we have to remember that in the end, um, it's work, right? And it's important, and relationships are important, but you can't do more than other people. If no one else cares about the relationship, right? You trying to bend over backwards,
Yeah.
contort yourself to try to preserve something that isn't helpful. And this is one of those areas where I think it is particularly helpful to work with a coach if you're having these kinds of challenges, because you can do some role play, you can work through scenarios that help you, you know get to a place where you can be assertive. It is okay to be assertive.
Absolutely.
Aggressive
No.
is not the goal, but being assertive, standing up for yourself, and finding mutual ground to move forward. And a reframe for boundaries is that is it's not about control, right? This is about creating what you want to be doing is creating a structure that allows for productive work to happen. Right. And so if we think about it in that frame, with that lens, that it's not about micromanagement when it comes to your team. It's not about controlling other people and telling them what to do or how to do it, or that they can't do something. But it's saying, if we're going to be productive, if we're going to get to the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve, we've got to put some boundaries around how we behave and interact in order to make that possible. You think about brainstorming sessions, that's what that is, right? When you think about brainstorming, and what is the number one rule of brainstorming is not to shoot down ideas when people put the ideas on there. That's a boundary,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And that's creating structure for productive work. And so, going back to my story, we're putting ideas on the table, and people are like, we can't do that. And this case said this. And it's like, stop. Let's just put the stuff out there. There will be time to evaluate and make decisions about whether or not something is the right way to go. Um, but you got to be willing, again, to have that conversation. And again, whether it's with your team members or it's with people that you're working with on an ad hoc basis or a project basis, continuing basis, you've got to be willing to have the conversations and establish boundaries so that you can work well together. And then when it's over, the project's over, or they're no longer on the team, if you don't like each other, you don't interact, right? And this is something I'm telling my trainees all the time, and my clients and coaching. You don't have to like people, and they don't have to like you. But if you're working together, if you're in a situation, you're working together, unless there's a way to either get out of it or to replace people, it is what it is. And you've got to find a way to make the best of it. So have the conversations, right? And let them know what the expectations are. And you can do that being direct, professional, assertive, stand your ground. At the same time, you want to make sure that you're not throwing out threats, and that you're going to follow through with whatever the consequences are. And I think often our challenge with this is that we haven't stopped to think about how to actually hold people accountable for their behavior, or we feel like we don't have any authority over them, right? When they're not on your team, you don't have any authority. on them. So when you're working with people on projects and cross function teams and things like that, right? You don't have any necessarily have any authority. It's a little different when it's someone on your team. And so you've got to think things through and be creative about it. But the bottom line is the willingness to set boundaries, clear expectations, and expectations go both ways. So let them know what they can expect of you. What you can expect of me is that I'm going to listen to what you have to say and I'm going to respond respectfully. And maybe if you set an example, right, you can have some influence and get someone to turn around. This is not about telling someone that they're difficult, right? Those are not the way you're. Although I have said this to people, you're being difficult, right? You're being difficult, but this is not about calling people out and say you're difficult, right? Putting a label on them. You're difficult. You're hard to work with. This is how can we work together? We need to find a way to work together. How can we do that?
Yeah, I think one of the techniques for that is getting some perspective. And usually when I see somebody engaging in behavior that may be indicative of difficulty, eye rolling, disengage, you say something, they look the other way, lack of eye contact. I'll just simply say, so what do you think about what I just said? So instead of calling attention to their behavior, you're engaging them. It's kind of like you're acknowledging the behavior, but you're not saying you're being a difficult person.
Right.
So I will just say, so what are your thoughts about what I just said? So you can kind of get in their mind. Maybe they're, if they go like this, maybe they're just cold. You don't know, right? And you could misinterpret that. So that's one of the techniques that I use, and it's been very helpful. I think the other thing is when it comes to boundaries, and you hinted at this, and one of the things on my list is you really got to pick your battles.
True.
If it really doesn't matter, if you find that you just want to engage that person because their behavior bothers you, that's probably a sign that you need to not engage with them, right? Because
right.
But we all get like that. I'm going to give that person a piece of my mind, or this person, we're all adults here. This is the other one. We're all adults here. This is what you said, right? We should be able to. Well, that's an assumption that people are thinking like you're thinking. And when we start doing that, it's our mental model, right? Well, we should be able to. We're all educated people. We're all have you are all lawyers. We're all lawyers. We're all educated. We all know law. We all know how we all know how to interact with people. We know how to talk to people. Why can't this work? That's because people have their own stuff going on. And so when you find yourself doing that, that's a time to take a step back and
absolutely
really assess. And then you can start thinking, okay, am I getting triggered by this? Do I need to go and do something to calm myself down? Do I have an unreasonable assumption? And I catch myself doing that a lot. I think, and this is shame on me, right? I think that people with a certain level of education should behave in a certain way. Of course, I discount all the times when I'm acting like an immature knucklehead, but that's beside the point. And that's the thing. We kind of project some of these things onto other people. And so we have to have that self-awareness. We have to look at the situation and really think about, what am I projecting, right? What's actually going on here? A conversation I had with someone last week revolved around truth and fact. What's the difference between truth and fact, right? Truth is our subjective opinion about what's going on. Fact is what's actually happening. So sometimes we have to make those distinctions so that we're not going into a situation with our assumptions, thinking that something's going on, and it's definitely not what's happening in that situation.
Right. That gives me sort of two Tony Robbins isms. And one is nothing has any meaning other than that which we give it.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we go around ascribing meaning to things, it may or may not mean that. And definitely sticking to the facts. And I spent yesterday with the legally terminating people. Focus on when you're documenting facts, and you're only documenting facts, right? You're not documenting your opinion, your interpretation of what the facts mean, any of that. And if you can't prove it, if you didn't observe it and you can't prove it, then you're not saying it, you're not documenting it. And then there was something else, and it slipped my mind because I didn't write it down. But I'm sure it'll come back to me. And then the third thing that I want to bring up, assuming somewhere before we're done in a few minutes, that thought reappears, is that your role is also to adapt and influence without compromising your authority, whatever authority you have in the situation, right? And in the case of someone is being difficult that's on your team, obviously it's a different level of authority than when it's not someone on your team and you don't have any real authority, right? But to take the time to recognize that your response to everyone, whether they ultimately are difficult or not, that your response to them is not going to be the same, right? You're not going to interact with everyone with the same approach. And this is true in general in life, that and if you have multiple brothers and siblings, brothers and sisters, if you take a step back and look at it, you don't interact with each of them the same. If you have multiple children, you do not interact with each of them the same, right? And or your friends even. So why would you think that the people on your team that you could do that with, or people that you're working on a project basis with? And so it's the same with difficult people, right? If you've got multiple difficult people, your approach may not be the same. And their motivations for why they do what they do, why they behave the way that they do, may not be the same. Is it because they feel unheard, right? Are they lacking in confidence? Do they want to be in control? Right? And so their different motivations. Do they just have a personality clash with you? Right? The different underlying motivations or reasons dictate a different response from you on how you're going to interact with them. And so you want to take the time to recognize how you can deal with people differently. If someone on your team is a resistor, right? Maybe what you need to do is to give them choices or have them come up with choices that they can buy into. If it's someone who's, throwing other people under the bus or an excuse maker or something along that line, it shift from them being able to talk about the excuses to solutions and ask the question, how can we fix this? Right? So how they show up and why they show up that way will dictate how you respond to them. Someone who's into creating drama or coming up with making stories about everything, what Robert just said, keep it fact-based and unemotional, right? Let's get to the facts. And if there's someone that, for example, is into taking credit, I've worked with these people, they want to take credit for everything. Use team language, right? So that you are reinforcing it's about the collective. It's about all of us. And so every time they say I, you just say we, right? Us, the team, right? And so you
Unless they're French.
respond and say it again.
Unless they're French, because you're saying yes, yes, yes.
That's funny. That's funny, right? And then there may be times when some positive reinforcement might be the answer for them, right? So the bottom line is that you have to adapt. The only way you're going to change them is through influence. So you have to be the one that adapts and brings them along through your journey of adaptation.
Agreed. Agreed.
It's that time, the garbage truck time.
It's
So
garbage truck time. No, I agree with you. I think those are all really excellent points, and especially the use team language, because there are some people that love to take credit. Um, and we can talk about that another time, because I've had situations where I think I mentioned this on the show. My boss was giving his boss credit for something that I did. And when I asked him about that, he was like, "Oh, it's because he thinks that he created it." I was like, "How can you think that you create something that you didn't create?" But anyway, but that's a completely different story. But it just reminded me of that, and that was, and I had to think about this. This is it was my former boss's way of trying to make himself look good, in front of his boss by, oh, great and powerful Oz, you did this thing. But it's very funny that some people have to do that. And my way of dealing with him was just getting some information. I was curious, why did you do that? And he was like, "Oh, because he thinks that he created it." I said, "Well, you know that I did that, right?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I do know that." I said, "Okay." I just walked out of the room.
as long as you know, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what am I going to do?
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly. So, any final thoughts? Any other strategies that you have that we didn't, or tactics that you have that we haven't covered?
No, I think these are really. I think all of the things that you talked about, or are in my list of things. I think the only other thing that I would put in there is, um, use empathetic language. Try to use empathetic language. You don't have to agree with them, but verify. It's like, "Oh, I can see that you can say something like, I can see that you're upset about this," or something like that, or it's understandable that you're having these feelings. But that's not an agreement. That's saying, "No, it's understandable that they're reacting that way." And that's another thing that we tend to forget in our conversations when we have those. I call them high stakes conversations. We forget that the other person's emotions are just as valid as ours.
Mhm.
As wrong as we may think they are, their emotions belong to them, and they can put them wherever and use them wherever they want to, because they're inside of their head, and you can't change that. So one of the ways to help work through that resistance when you're encountering it is to actually verify or validate what they're feeling and validate their resistance, because it actually, counterintuitively, it helps lessen it. So that's the only thing that I would add.
Absolutely. And I would say that was something that I did with when I had the conversation, pulled that gentleman out and we had a conversation. And it's like, I get it. I understand, right? You represent clients and this is their position and you feel strongly about that. I get it, right? So, but you don't have to agree. And I think that becomes a thing, because if you agree, then you fuel something that may intensify, right? That behavior to continue to dig in. So
Yeah, I agree.
awesome. Well, I learned something. I learned some things today. And doing this, so a couple of final takeaways as we wrap up. You're right. You can't change difficult people, but you can change how you respond to them, how you manage them, and your reaction dictates or determines how much power they actually have over the situation, right? So you need to be clear. And I didn't use this word specifically, but certainly this is a part of it, being consistent, right? When you are clear and you know what you're moving towards and the outcome that you're attempting to have, being consistent becomes a part of that. And then accountable, right? Holding people accountable for reducing the conflict and holding them to a standard of respect and reducing conflict, because it is about getting the work done. And so if you can keep a focus on that, being productive, having productive work done, and that's what you're focused on, right? You can help people to get honed in, zoned in to that thing. And if someone refuses to improve, if they're a part of your team, right, then they are creating toxicity in the workplace, and you have to deal with that accordingly. If this is someone outside of that, it's a project base or someone that you're going to meet, encounter on a less frequent basis than someone on your team. I think Robert's point about picking your battles becomes a part of that. Right. So the point of this is to give you some structure, right? Some practical tools or strategies or tactics that you can use that can help you stick to um, a way forward when dealing with people who are challenging to work with. Right? Don't let them rob your energy and create toxicity in your team. So, Robert, if someone wanted to work with you and get better at dealing with difficult people or having those challenging conversations or just showing up as a better version of themselves, how would they go about doing that?
Sure, they can reach me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com, or they can just send me, that's how you can send me an email, or just go to the website, roberthilliardcoaching.com, and they can fill out that contact form, let me know what kind of challenges they're having, the goals that you have, and we'll set up a discovery call. Also on my website, if you go to articles, there are 2 articles that will help you deal with a difficult boss. And one is The Allure of Toxic Leadership, and the other 2 are the Toxic Boss Survival Guides, parts 1 and 2. So if what you're dealing with falls into that category, a good place to start may be those articles.
I love that. Love that. And if you want to connect with me, you can reach out at shiftingintoaction.now.site. Shiftingintoaction.now.site. There are a couple of ebooks there that can be helpful for you, including some help with being mindful, right? We didn't get into those specific tools. We've talked about them in the past. You can probably find them on another podcast. But take a breath, just take a deep breath, right? Take a deep breath and know that it's going to be okay. And we know that it's going to be okay because we keep showing up. We keep showing up, and we show up for you here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So take care.
Bye now.